Let's now listen to these words from this week's reading. Here we go. This week's reading is on practicality. Many spiritual seekers and others with high ideals lose sight of the need to make their idealism practical. Many even resent the suggestion that they try to put an ideal into practice, as though the very effort to do so would mean somehow lessening its purity. But God is no idle dreamer. Were the universe not kept in a state of perfect balance, chaos, not harmony, would be the common state. We too should be practical in our idealism. Life, to be ever expansive, must be a search for truth. Will it work? Is the preliminary question to, is it true? The test of an ideal in whether it is practical or not. By practicality, we mature from the state of idle dreaming to become emissaries of the truth. Let us now affirm together, first loudly and then a few more times, ever more softly. Let us affirm, though my spirit soars in the skies of consciousness, my feet and hands labor here on earth to make truth real to all. Again, though my spirit soars in the skies of consciousness, my feet and hands labor here on earth to make truth real to all. And now, quietly, though my spirit soars in the skies of consciousness, my feet and hands labor here on earth to make truth real to all. And now whispering with intensity, though my spirit soars in the skies of consciousness, my feet and hands labor here on earth to make truth real to all. And now mentally, focusing your gaze at the point between your eyebrows, though my spirit soars in the skies of consciousness, my feet and hands labor here on earth to make truth real to all. Let not my thoughts lift me up through beautiful clouds of imagined possibilities, unless you give me the power also to materialize my dreams. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Now we'll have our reading today from Rays of the One Light.
The topic for today is Living in the Presence of God from the book Rays of the One Light by Swami Kriyananda. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhans Yogananda. In the Gospel of Saint Matthew, chapter 25, we read of a king. King here is referred to God, who welcomes certain devotees to the divine consciousness, saying, I was an hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in, naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me. The elect, the devotee, asked him when it was they had served him in these ways. And the king answered, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. To see God as residing in every human being, as indeed he does, is to open oneself to limitless opportunities for serving him. Paramahansa Yogananda, in Autobiography of a Yogi, described a saint who lived in this consciousness as the greatest man of humility I ever knew. He described a seemingly chance encounter with this saint. Another day found me walking alone near the Havra railroad station. I stood for a moment by a temple, silently criticizing a small group of men with drum and cymbals who were violently reciting a chant. How undevotionally they use the Lord's divine name in mechanical repetition. I reflected. My gaze was astonished by the rapid approach of Master Mahashay. Sir, how come you here? The saint, ignoring my question, answered my thought. Isn't it true, little sir, that the beloved's name sounds sweet from all lips, ignorant and wise? He passed his arm around me affectionately. I found myself carried on his magic carpet to the merciful presence. If you would see God, watch for him everywhere. If you would hear his voice, listen for it in all sounds and also in their supporting silences. If you would know God, seek his wisdom behind merely human knowledge. The Bhagavad Gita in the 6th chapter states, one who beholds my presence everywhere and all things dwelling equally in me, he never loses loving sight of me, nor I of him, through all eternity. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
Well, welcome again, everybody, to this satsang today. And I was reminded when the introduction was happening, the Meda mentioned that I've been here serving in India, serving with India for 20 years. And I remember still that time coming to India in 2005. Now, I had been to India previously, I'd been on pilgrimage. But me and a few others had come to India in 2005 in December, right about now, at this time of the month. And we had come in December to visit Swami Kriyananda, who had come to India in 2003. And now, of course, he had been back and forth to India many times. But in 2003, he had decided that it was time for Ananda Sangha to establish a continual presence in India, to begin an ashram in India. And he gathered up many souls to come in 2003. And he was in India, and I had not seen him for a few years, 2 years or more. And so me and these people I traveled with came to India and went to him on pilgrimage. And the first thing he said to me when I came, he gave me a welcome, and he looked at me and said, Jaya, I want you to come to India, meaning I want you to shift to India. And but I was a busy man, had duties and responsibilities, and so it was I took a moment to process that, and I thought, Somaji, what would you like me to do? Why do you want me to come to India? And he said very simply, I want you to teach. And so it was put into motion in 2005. You might say one chapter of my life closed and another chapter opened, and it's been my joy to be able to serve in these many years since that time. Now, this topic today, God's presence in everywhere, it reminds me, I mean, obviously we could take this in many different directions, but reminds me a couple of stories. And this thought that we are taught to see God everywhere. And how do we do that? I mean, we often say that is, I see God in the flowers, and I see God in the rivers, and I see God in all the people. That's a nice affirmation, but do we really do that? Because do we see God in the ignorant, and those people that are hostile, and those people that are maybe not so pleasant? And can we see God in them too? And of course, we know this is the ideal, but how do we actually come to that point? How do we do this? It's so vast, such an overwhelming task. And and you could say, is well, how do we see God in infinity? And is that possible to have a personal relationship with infinity itself? And my sense of this is that yes, it masters, they say that's our goal, but we have to start smaller. And I think it's the everybody, I believe, probably experiences this. Maybe some are spontaneously taken up into that infinite realm. He says, but we have to cultivate a personal relationship with God. And I think that's where it begins. Each of us having that personal one-on-one feeling, a sense of unity, a sense of relationship. And of course, I think if we're philosophical about these things, we know that's limited. There's more than that. But that's where we have to begin. We have to begin with that relationship, whatever form it might take. And I'm reminded of this of a couple of stories. And years ago, we used to, in those days, we would, and probably we still do to some degree, from Pune, we'd go to Bombay or Mumbai regularly to do classes in Mumbai. And as after a few years of doing this myself and Nayaswami Jaya and others there from the Pune Center, now we asked Brahmachari at that time, now Nayaswami Sagar, who's stationed here now at Ananda Village, we asked him to take that up and cultivate that. And so Sagar began to go to Mumbai regularly. Practically every weekend he would go. And one day he was driving down there and he was going, I think he ran through a red light, or maybe he was going a little fast, but I think he went through a red light, and sure enough, policeman was right there waiting for him. You know how he comes out on the street, stops him. And what Sagar did, Brahmachari Sagar did, is what his usual tact, because it wasn't the first time he'd been stopped by a policeman, but his usual tact is, "Oh, sir, I'm so sorry." And he was dressed in yellow, and he says, "I'm a monk, and I was coming here to teach, and I was in a hurry, and I just missed it. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me." And it usually always worked. It worked well, and they would take pity on him, and his humility and the fact that he was a monk, and this is the policeman was of that sort, and so he says, "Oh, okay, but you have to answer my question. I want to ask you some questions." And that was the price that Sagar needed to pay. so, so he asked me, and he says, "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" And the policeman says, "Here in India, we have so many gods. There's gods this, gods that, one god, other god, all these gods. It's confusing. Which is the right God?" And so Sagar, very adroitly, he says, "Well, sir, yes, we have lots of gods, but God is in all these gods. All these gods, it's all are expressions of God. God's in everywhere. God's in all these forms. God's in Krishna. God's in Rama. God's in Jesus Christ. These are all expressions of God." And so you could imagine Sagar, probably after a day of giving classes, sort of expounding on that topic. And the policeman finally says, "You've solved my problem. Now I know. Thank you. Ganesha's God." And he left it at that and let him go. And away he went. And now he didn't say God is Ganesha. You could in Ganesha, but Ganesha is God. But that's good enough. You start somewhere, and then all of us. And it's good. Some people say, well, it's more than that. God is in everything. But we have to start with what we place God, and where is your love go? And you place your God and love in that. And Sri Yukteswar speaks of that. He says, some people, there's the simple man that begins of devotee. Maybe he gathers mud from the river, and he makes a mud image, and he decorates that image, and he worships that image, and he gives his love to that image. And he says one shouldn't, and a wiser person perhaps, or a scholarly person may come and make fun of that. Oh, how simple that man is. He says, but no, we should not do that. Actually, Paramahansa Yogananda said it's a spiritual sin to in any way destroy the spiritual faith of another person. He says, but Sri Yukteswar is saying he gives his devotion to that, and in time he receives back his. It's the instrument, you could see that image that he made there, very simple as it might be, and his religious faith is quite simple. He's not a scholar. He worships that, and he benefits from that. God comes in various ways, perhaps, to enlighten him a little bit and a little bit, and as time goes by, perhaps his vision of God expands, begins. But you have to begin somewhere. The idea is to begin awakening that love. And Swami Kriyananda, in that vein, he would say, and of course, this is how we learn. We learn to love. We have to learn to love. We have to be devoted. Think of a little girl. She has a doll. Her mother gives her a doll, and the little girl loves that doll, and plays with that doll, makes believe with that doll, and and devotes herself to that little doll, taking care of that. He says, would we make fun of that? Of course not. We would make, because that little girl, she's learning to love. And of course, later on in life, perhaps she has children of her own, and she's learned to develop and cultivate that love. And so this, in a sense, is we each of us, in our own way, we come to an understanding of what God might mean to us, and we don't criticize one or the other, but we start there and we develop and develop in our own way until our experience of that and our feelings for that begins to expand, to be more inclusive. And sometimes you hear people making comparisons. This person is more spiritual than that person for whatever reason. Oh, yes, and that fellow out on the street who does this or that, he's not very spiritual, because you're looking perhaps at that person out, in the outer form of what you might be seeing there. But one thing, or you might even say that person is more spiritual because look how wise that person is, because they can recite scripture. Some people just can roll it back, and the other one is uneducated. Does that make one more spiritual than the other? Well, I don't think it's healthy for us spiritually, individually, to judge people in that way or to think in that way. Because one thing I know, and I've learned this, and I suspect you've all learned this too. One thing I know, spirituality is not measured by what a person believes. I believe in Krishna. I believe in Jesus Christ. I believe in XYZ. And that doesn't make a person particularly spiritual. No, I don't sometimes, but again, we shouldn't criticize either. Person is on the scale, and they're moving in a good direction, and it's generally good to have beliefs if those beliefs are beneficial, if they're benevolent. But of course, it's not always that way. And so this is, of course, we don't measure by what one believes, because people can do very wrong things just because they believe. Spirituality is about how, I think, in my mind, how one behaves, not about what one believes. People can believe many things. Good things, bad things, harmful things. And this, of course, as you look in the scriptures, and is very much illustrated in the scriptures, in the Bible in this case, it's illustrated again and again, that stories of Christ's life and teachings. And one of the missions, I think, that he came as an avatar was to break down these barriers that spirituality is defined by rules and beliefs, and translate that and expand that to illustrate that spirituality is what one does, what's in one's heart. So the Pharisees and the scribes in his day knew all the laws, they knew all the rules, and they probably prayed regularly according to the scriptures. Now, that's not bad in itself, but it's not the whole picture. Is that necessarily making a person saintly doing that? I don't think so necessarily, because saintliness is something inside oneself. And so when Christ went to his first disciples from the Bible, he says he called them fishermen, who perhaps were educated, perhaps not. He says, follow me. And those are the ones that he could see into their heart, what was in his heart. And so this is where we begin with spirituality is developing the you could say the love of the heart, developing the right attitudes, and begin slowly expanding upon that. And the question we could really say is, does someone, and if you were to measure, and like I do say, it's probably best not to be measuring other people, measure yourself. Does one have a sympathetic heart? I think that's a better measuring stick. An ability to recite scripture and the intellectuality that so often accompanies one's measure of what spirituality is. Does one have a sympathetic heart? And that's what we want to develop. How do we develop that? And I think you start, and it's all of it, and it's start and finish. You go beyond our little ego self, and your understanding, when you start to go beyond the ego, understanding the pettiness, and seeing that in ourselves, and begin to go beyond that, and begin to expand our sympathies to include other people. And I think this, of course, is the essence of that story of that in our reading today. Master Mahashaya, he basically, but isn't it true, little sir, that the beloved's name sounds sweet from all lips, ignorant and wise? And what Master said, he basically encapsulated this idea of the ability to each of us expanding our sympathies, expanding our sense of compassion, expanding our heart's love, Master, then outwardly, and putting it into action. He described this as the social way to cosmic consciousness. And this is what Christ is describing in that passage that was read in the Bible. It's, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was in prison, you came to visit me. When I was in need, you gave me help. This is how we begin to grow, is we begin to expand our sense of who and what we are, to embrace other people. And the important thing, and this is really the important thing that Swami Kriyananda, in his commentary on this reading, and he makes a very interesting point when of the king said, you served me, but came to visit me, you fed me and you gave me water when I was thirsty. And he says, they were the ones, the story says, these were the ones who were worthy of salvation. Now, and why? He says he didn't, and he said, the point Swamiji makes is they didn't even realize that it was the king that they were serving. They didn't realize it was Christ that they were serving. Perhaps if you follow the analogy to its conclusion, they didn't realize they seen Christ in other people. They weren't thinking that way. The important thing, he says, that they served. They didn't necessarily know they were serving the king, maybe, or they were. And in our case, we don't always know that we're serving God and other people. Yes, we like to see God in other people. And so you might say, an ignorant person might say, well, I don't see God in other people, so therefore I'm not going to serve them. I only serve God. Have you ever heard somebody say something like that? When you say, service is good for you. He says, yes, but I don't see God in that, so I'm not going to serve it. Well, that's hardly a wise thing to say. I mean, the simple matter is whether we see God in others or not, the important thing, Jesus said, was the fact that they served. And Swamiji goes on to say in his analysis of this reading, he says, by their active expression of compassion, and you could apply this to everything, by the active expression of compassion, the heart's sympathies are expanded as a matter of course. It's natural. When we express compassion, when we express love, selflessly, helpfully, servicefully, the heart's sympathies naturally expand. And we become inwardly identified with other people's well-being. That will gradually lead to a deeper identification with all. And what it is when we can inwardly identify with another person's well-being, what's happening? It's taking our attention away from our own selves, because the tendency of the ego and tendency of the little small-minded is what's in it for me? I want to be better. I need this. Well, help this. I'm going to think of myself. To the degree we can put that aside and just help other people and not think that way, we expand. Consciousness expand. And that's what spirituality is about, is learning to grab a hold of that idea and gradually begin to expand it. So to sum this up, the point is, by their active expression of compassion, their heart sympathies expanded naturally. And as the heart sympathies expanded, our spirituality, our consciousness of identification with something beyond our own little self expands. And you could say that's the process of spiritual maturation. Spirituality begins to develop. And so this is what each of us are really trying to do. We're trying to get rid of our self-centeredness and expand it to include others. And from that comes an ability to feel and identify with others. And this is why Swami Kriyananda says the definition of maturity, just natural maturity of a child into adult, but also spiritual maturity is the ability to relate to the realities of other people, to put ourselves aside for a moment and to relate to their realities. And then to do not just this, but you can't stop there. It's not stopping there. It's the active expression of feeling. That sense of compassion is to try to do something, to be helpful. And without the expression, it's just philosophy. So in other words, what we're saying here, so how do we express compassion? We serve. We reach out beyond our own little ego selves. And the path to God is one of expansion of one's identity more and more and more. And we go beyond the confines of the little ego. And it's like the chain of egotism begins to weaken until finally we can break that bondage. And of course, eventually this is what we experience, that state of samadhi that is mentioned in the autobiography. We think of samadhi, attaining samadhi by using our willpower and, diving deep, but we can't dive deep if we're shackled by egotism. So we have to break those bondage. And this, in the Christian tradition, or you could even say in the language, of spiritual language, is called redemption. You hear this word, redemption. I've been given redemption. I've been, the judge, is issued a writ of redemption. Redemption, what it means is, redemption means escape. In the spiritual sense, it means escaping from the confines of egotism and discovering in the process of that, when we break those bonds or shackles of egotism, we naturally discover an infinite reality in God. And it's, in a sense, we don't have to find God in that sense. God finds us. God's there waiting for us. But he's waiting, God's waiting, but we don't take the shackles off. So you could sort of imagine a little frustrating from God's point of view. Why does this guy unlock the chains? Then he can come into the home here. It's the eternal question, isn't it? And I mean, that's the job of the devotee. And so you could say we need to redeem ourselves. Just this one thing, redeem daily. But this is something we do not just once. I mean, it's daily. This is the practice of meditation. This is the practice of spirituality. It's a process of redemption, making us whole again. And you could, in spiritual language, you could sort of say this is we redeem ourselves through grace by accepting the Christ consciousness in our lives and by our efforts, which draws that grace. Well, that's kind of a highfalutin way of saying just get rid of the ego, but that's what we're doing when we meditate, and that's what we're doing. And how do we do that? How do we make that? The reading today was practical. How do we make that practical? We can practice Kriya Yoga. And that's what we're doing. And really what it is, it's turning away from the darkness, the most practical thing we do, turn away from the darkness and toward the light, the redeeming light. Sometimes it's that. And we pay off our karma, you could say, through the practice of Kriya Yoga. And so Kriya Yoga itself is an act of redemption. Why? It's because it's a turning away from the darkness and toward the light. And you can think of it even, because they say we loosen the chains of our karma through practice of Kriya. So you could say that we're redeeming our bad karma by getting rid of it and neutralizing it. Or you could sort of say we're redeeming that bad karma by lifting it up into the light. But you don't have to think individually, oh, I got that particular karma and I'm going to... I mean, it's not bad to do that, but how many billions and billions of seeds of karma do we have? And if you just think in terms of each individual one, you'll never get to the end of it. The main reason you won't get to the end of it is because we keep creating more all the time. So, but nevertheless, if we just turn to the light, and I think it's more wise to think of, God, I'm just going to turn myself, heart, body, mind, and soul and strength to you. And you figured out the individual. I think that's probably the more wisest thing to do. So in deep meditation, we go into that and we offer ourselves up into the light. I am redeemed in the light. Feel God coming in by thy grace, Lord. Now, it's God's grace that redeems us, not our efforts that redeem us. But it does take our efforts to do that which we have the ability to do, which is turn to the light. That's what we can do. And then the light redeems us. But we have to turn to the light. And this happens when we practice Kriya correctly. We offer our karma, we offer ourselves, we offer our ego up into the light. And as our consciousness begins to, you could say, relax those bonds and identify more with the freedom, we begin to feel a sense of joy. And the karma begins to be melted away. In an individual, karma can be we think of something as karmic, but the effect that individual karma, whatever it might be, has upon us is really dependent upon our own state of consciousness. Something can seem, oh, it's so terrible, terrible, terrible. But we uplift our consciousness and have God's presence. Put yourself in the presence of God. And we say, oh, it's not, okay, whatever. And you can accept everything joyfully in God's presence. And so was it a bad karma? It was just karma. It wasn't good or bad. But when you put yourself in a sense of freedom, a sense of joy, then you're able to endure and take everything. Your karma is expiated. We're redeemed, you could say. So if you practice Kriya, the important thing is don't keep thinking so much about the individual karmas and all that. Hold on to try to feel joyful, releasing yourself into the light, God's grace, and that joy that comes after you have a nice meditation. Hold on to that and integrate and try to embed that freedom into your action. And you begin to see God everywhere. God, oh yeah, it's like putting on colored glasses. The color of the glass is going to your shades are going to depend upon how you see things in life. And if we can develop that joy in ourselves, we begin to see it that way. And God's presence is everywhere. So Master, I think that story of Master and the people seemed a little bit of ignorant in their devotional chanting, but yet God was in that too. It all depends how you look at it. And we have lifetimes and lifetimes of karma. It's a long journey, so no need to become discouraged. Just a little bit of upliftment of consciousness will free one from dire fears and colossal sufferings. And remember, too, no need to think of all the little karmic bondages and chains that are tying us down. He says, when we can feel God in our lives, a deeply meditating yogi can release the karma of an entire lifetime during even one meditation. We sweep that light of superconsciousness, and the whole over an incarnation, and it's gone, it's freed. And so seek ye first. That's the message you could say here also. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all else will be given to you. So don't worry about this or that karma. The important thing is to feel God's presence in whatever way you can. And then puff on it like a little ember, and slowly, slowly it begins to grow. Your vision of what God might be is not necessarily the next person's, but that feeling that you have, that personal relationship that you have with God is sacred to you. Puff on that, give a little devotion, and it'll grow, and ultimately you will be completely redeemed in God's light. God bless all of you.